Livermore forms part of the main road running through the Aintree district of Liverpool in the northwest of England. Once an old turnpike road, by the 1950s, as today, it formed part of the busy main A59 linking the cities of Liverpool and Preston. Hugh George Walker ran an antique shop at 98 Livermore, Walton Hill, close to the famous Grand National Racecourse. Walker was 82 but looked even older. Small and frail, his body distorted with severe arthritis, he'd been a widower for many years, and with both his sons having left home and working in medicine, he lived alone in a rambling 16-room house with his 2 mongrel dogs and a myriad of antiques, curios, vintage clocks and electrical goods. Nicknamed locally as the Old Curiosity Shop after the Charles Dickens book, the shop window was crammed full of a bewildering variety of bric-a-brac and second-hand goods, crammed on shelves that bowed under the weight. Each room was stacked from floor to ceiling with a vast array of goods, and every square inch filled with some kind of dusty item. In recent times, Walker had seemingly become a hoarder and appearing to be reluctant to sell any of his stock. The shop door was usually locked, and customers wishing to browse or purchase had to knock loudly and wait for the old man to let them in, if they were lucky. Despite these eccentricities, George Walker was a kindly old man, popular with his neighbours, who would look out for his welfare and check on him if he hadn't been seen out and about for a few days. So it was that when, on the night of Wednesday the 14th of January 1953, Walker's 2 dogs kept the neighbourhood awake with their incessant barking, a neighbour went to investigate. There was no answer to her knocking at the shop, and with no lights on, she assumed the old man had gone to stay with family for the night. The barking continued on the following day to such an extent that Mary and Owen, whose house on adjacent Hall Lane overlooked the rear of the shop, felt something was definitely wrong and went to fetch the police. When an officer forced his way in, he found George Walker lying dead at the foot of his stairs. That this was an accident was immediately discounted. From the extent of his injuries, Walker had clearly been battered to death. The constable secured the scene and went to report the incident to his superiors. Chief Superintendent Herbert Balmer of Liverpool CID was put in charge of what was clearly a murder investigation. Balmer was an experienced detective and in recent years had headed the investigation into notable cases such as the Cameo Cinema murder and more recently the murder of Beatrice Rimmer in Wavertree that had resulted in the execution of 2 young Manchester men in the spring of 1952. Balmer immediately called upon the services of Dr. Charles Sains-Hill, the recently appointed Home Office pathologist based at nearby Huyton. Dr. Sains-Hill arrived shortly after midnight and having fixed the time of death at approximately 24 to 48 hours previously, he had the body taken to the city mortuary for a fuller examination. The post-mortem, carried out in the early hours, found that George Walker had suffered 32 laceration wounds to the head, some of them 4 inches long. The skull and the left cheekbone had both been shattered in what had clearly been a brutal and prolonged attack. As dawn broke, Dr. James Firth and his team of forensic experts based at the police laboratory at Preston arrived at the scene and began a detailed examination of the house. As well as splashes of blood in the hallway, there were numerous splashes on the mangle that stood by the kitchen door. On the whole floor was a large pool of blood, and close by a set of footprints, seemingly made by someone wearing the fashionable crepe sole shoes. The forensic team also found the probable murder weapon. On the floor in the hallway was a broken wooden shaft that must have belonged to either an axe or a hammer. The missing piece was found in the upstairs scullery. In the sink, immersed in bloody water inside an enamel bowl, was the broken shaft containing an axe head. This was later found to match the wounds on the dead man's head. Balmer made an appeal for anyone who had been in the vicinity of the shop on Wednesday or had been a customer to come forward and help with their inquiries. Amongst those who called at a police station on Friday afternoon was John Lawrence Todd, a 20-year-old labourer who lived with his mother and 2 sisters at a house at 98 Roxburgh Street, Walton. Todd told detectives he had been in the shop earlier that week to buy some gramophone needles, but knew nothing about the attack other than what he had read in the papers. He made a statement and was allowed to leave. Inquiries meanwhile soon revealed the suspect police wished to trace. The dead man's sister, Mary Walker, told of a man who had recently visited the shop on 2 occasions. Mary said she had visited her brother on the previous Friday, 9th of January. By 2:30 on the Friday afternoon, the man called, went upstairs and began working on a clock in a room over the shop. She learned from her brother that the man had called into the shop the previous day. He told Mr. Walker he could repair timepieces and asked if there was any work for him. Walker said there was a grandfather clock that needed attention, and the man went to work. She was there on the following Monday when the man called again and continued to work on the clock, leaving that evening at about 6:15. She noticed that the clock mender had a knife attached to his waistband. The knife was a single-edged in a brown leather sheath pinned together with 5 metal rivets, with the blade protruding a little from the bottom of the sheath. She told police he was a thin, pale-faced man with a large nose and a wart beside his eye, and kept calling her brother Pop. That description also matched one given by 2 schoolboys who had called at the shop on the Tuesday afternoon to buy some parts for a radio. The door was opened by a man with a large nose, and he had told the boys to call back on the following day. The descriptions were published in the local newspapers, and an appeal for any information to help solve the murder was made. When Iris Tucker came down for breakfast at her home in Park Grove, Bootle, on the morning of Monday the 19th of January, she was shocked and startled at what she read in her morning paper. 22-year-old Iris had worked as a cinema usherette, and for the last few days one of the main topics of conversation amongst her workmates was the brutal murder of an old man in nearby Aintree. Sipping her tea, she opened the morning paper, and a shiver ran down her spine at what she read. The paper carried a description of a man wanted in connection with the murder, and the details bore an uncanny resemblance to her boyfriend of the last 18 months. There was also the mention of a blood-stained fawn raincoat found beside the body, the same colour and type he had told Iris he had lost a few days earlier. Surely the murder couldn't be him, yet everything she read suggested it could well be. She called her father, Walter Tucker, who wasn't particularly enamoured by her daughter's boyfriend, and as he read through the newspaper article, he telephoned the local police. When word of this call reached Chief Superintendent Balmer, he sent Chief Inspector Morris and Sergeant Metcalf to interview Iris Tucker and her father. Satisfied they were onto the killer, the detectives went back to Roxburgh Street and brought the suspect back in for further questioning. Todd was taken to nearby Rice Lane police station, where he made a further statement and admitted he had been in the shop on the day of the murder, and then told an implausible story. He said he had called at the shop to repair a number of clocks, when as he was leaving, the old man had stumbled over an axe on the floor and fallen against him, busting his nose in the fall. Blood sprayed all over the wall at the foot of the staircase. Walker had then rubbed his bloody hands on Todd's coat, so he took it off and the old man promised to get it cleaned. He swore that Walker had been alive when he left the shop, and someone else must have gained access later that day and killed him. Detectives knew he was lying, especially as there had been no mention of this when Todd made his first statement. At just after 7 p.m. that evening, John Todd was charged with the murder of George Walker on or about the 14th of January. When the charge was read out to him by Sergeant Morris, Todd replied, "No, only I didn't murder him." As John Todd made his first remand appearance in court, George Walker was laid to rest at Everton Cemetery. The funeral service was held at his local church, St Peter's Aintree, just across the road from the shop, which was now boarded up and secured. After Todd had made 2 further brief court appearances, committal proceedings were arranged for 11th of February at Liverpool Magistrates Court. At the start of the committal hearing, Todd's solicitor, Harry Livermore, asked for press to be excluded from the court. The examining magistrate, keen for nothing to be kept out of the public domain, refused the request, and after a 3-day hearing, John Todd was committed for trial at the next session of the Liverpool Assizes. Todd stood trial before Mr Justice Casals on Wednesday the 8th of April at Liverpool's St George's Hall. After he pleaded not guilty to the charge, prosecuting counsel Edward Wool QC outlined the case against him. Wool described how the barking dogs had led to discovery of George Walker's battered body in the blood-stained hallway of his home. He told the jury about the condition of the body, the discovery of the axe, and of the subsequent recovery of items of blood-stained clothing belonging to Todd, including a fawn raincoat, a navy blue suit and a pair of brown shoes with crepe soles. Iris Tucker gave evidence that Todd had told her he had had the raincoat stolen when he had been without it when they met up on the Saturday after the murder. Further evidence linked Todd in the form of some items of silver in his possession that were identified as having belonged to the dead man. As Wool completed the prosecution's case, silence fell over the courtroom as defence counsel Miss Rose Heilbron, QC, got to her feet and addressed the court. I shall call the accused. John Todd entered the witness box. Miss Heilbron's task of presenting a convincing defence was clearly going to be a tricky one. Her main problem was that Todd's only feasible defence had to be based upon his third and final statement to the police. After two statements denying any involvement, Todd now maintained that Mr. Walker had tripped over an axe and fallen in the hallway, thereby hurting his nose, which had bled upon Todd's raincoat. It was a far from convincing story, so much so that part of it had already been used in court by Mr. Wool as part of the prosecution's case. Todd insisted that George Walker had recovered from the fall and had even opened the door to let him out of the house, with the two men agreeing to meet up later in the week. Todd also said that just before he left, Mr. Walker told him that he was expecting a visitor that day and would be going away with the visitor until Friday. The court heard that as well as finding human blood on Todd's clothing, Dr. Staines-Hill had taken scrapings from his fingernails. He found that these were also stained with blood. Todd's explanation was that blood had got onto his nails when he had been scratching some sores on his leg. At the end of the examination, Miss Heilbron asked Todd a final question. "Did you kill Mr. Walker?" Todd replied firmly, "I did not kill Mr. Walker." Miss Heilbron called no other defence witnesses. When Mr. Wool stood up to cross-examine Todd, Mr. Justice Cassells interrupted by saying, "I think this is a convenient moment to adjourn until tomorrow." The jury of 10 men and 2 women filed out. Todd went down from the dock and the courtroom emptied. The second day of the trial began with Mr. Wool's cross-examination. Todd admitted that the story about losing his raincoat was untrue. He said that the silver Hunter watch, which the jeweller identified as belonging to Mr. Walker, was in fact one of his own watches. He said he had got it some 18 months earlier from a man at the Bedford cinema where his girlfriend worked. Todd was shown a book of photographs. Mr. Wool asked him to look at the photograph showing the body lying in the hall. When the old man fell after bruising his nose, did he fall like that? Todd replied, no. Asked to explain how the bloodstains had got on his raincoat, Todd maintained that he had just bled on me. Referring to the photograph of Mr. Walker's body, Wool's final question was, I take it that all this gory mess is subsequent to you leaving. Todd studied the photograph for a moment and then said, yes. Mr. Justice Cassells then gave the jury his summing up. No man is to be convicted on a charge such as this merely because he told lies, but you are not to leave out of your consideration the reflection as to why he told lies. If you are satisfied that his was the hand that rained those 32 savage blows upon the defenceless man's head, then you will find him guilty, the judge told the jury as he concluded his summing up. The jury took less than 30 minutes to find that it was Todd's hands that had dealt the fatal blows. Todd showed no sign of emotion as the verdict was announced. He stood erect as the black cap was placed on Mr. Justice Cassells' head and sentence of death was passed. At the Court of Criminal Appeal on Monday the 4th of May, Todd's conviction on the grounds that the circumstantial evidence against him was based on untrue statements he had made was presented to the panel. Dismissing the appeal, Mr. Justice Croon Johnson said that there was nothing in the appeal to warrant the original verdict being revoked, and Todd was taken back to the condemned cell at Liverpool's Walton Jail to await his fate. Strenuous efforts were made to save Todd from the gallows. On Thursday the 14th of May, Solicitor Harry Livermore sent a letter to the Home Secretary, David Maxwell Fyfe, suggesting that a medical inquiry should be held to investigate Todd's sanity. It was a forlorn hope. Todd had already faced a medical board in prison and they could find no sign of any form of insanity. Mr. Maxwell Fyfe replied to say he was unable to comply with the request and the law must take its course. At 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the 19th of May 1953, John Lawrence Todd was hanged at Walton Jail, the prison standing just a mile from his home. Despite it being a cold grey morning, a crowd of over 200, mostly women and many with babies in their arms, waited outside the prison gate for notice to be posted that the execution had taken place. Todd was hanged by Albert Pierpoint, assisted by Joe Broadbent, participating for the first time as an assistant executioner. Standing 5 foot 8 inches tall and weighing 140 pounds, he was given a drop of 7 foot 10 inches. His body was left to hang for the statutory 1 hour, by which time his broken neck had stretched by 1.25 inches. George Walker's 2 dogs, a black Scottish Terrier and a brown mongrel, had been taken in by the Edge Lane Dogs Home since his murder in January. They had been kept together until it was announced on Wednesday the 27th of May, a week after his murderer had paid the ultimate penalty, that RSPCA officers had found an owner for each dog. Keen to see that the pets were not wanted just for their curiosity value, they were found new homes close together but far away from their former home in the old curiosity shop. The shop where George Walker was brutally battered to death still stands today, but has changed frontage several times over the years. John Todd lived just half a mile from Everton's Goodison Park football stadium. For decades, the football team have run onto the pitch to the tune from the popular 60s TV police show Z-Cars, set in a fictional borough of Liverpool. The theme music became a hit record in the 1960s. The name of the music? Johnny Todd. And also on a football theme, Todd's solicitor, Harry Livermore, was a passionate Liverpool FC supporter. In 1985, he represented several fans caught up in the aftermath of the Heysel Stadium tragedy in Belgium, which had claimed the lives of 39 Italian football supporters. 4 years later, he was a spectator at Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, when 97 Liverpool fans were crushed to death following the massive overcrowding in the terrace behind the goal. Livermore came out of retirement to help the families in their legal fight for justice. He died later that year at the age of 81. Chief Superintendent Herbert Balmer's reputation has been tainted in recent times. Although he was highly commended for the work of his team on this investigation, and there was little doubt of Todd's guilt, his work on previous cases has been found to be less than commendable. Balmer was responsible for the conviction of George Kelly, who was hanged in 1950 for his part in the Cameo Cinema murder. In recent times, the investigation was found to be tainted, and Kelly was awarded a posthumous pardon in 2003. In 1952, Balmer had helped secure guilty verdicts against Edward Devlin and Alfred Burns for their parts in the Cranbourne Street murder, in which Mrs. Beatrice Rimmer was found battered to death in her home in Wavertree, Liverpool. As with Kelly, there was a certain amount of disquiet with these verdicts. An appeal for the verdicts to be quashed was rejected in 2011, but campaigners feel, like Kelly, theirs was a miscarriage of justice, and the fight to win both men a reprieve continues to this day. Herbert Balmer rose to become the acting Chief Constable in 1964, but because he had only served with Liverpool City Police, and the rule that any chief must have served in at least 2 different forces prevented him being appointed, and he retired in the following year. He died in 1970 at the age of 68, having suffered a massive heart attack just 5 days before he was due to be remarried. My name is Steve Fielding. Thank you for watching and listening to another episode in Tales from the Hangman's Record. Please like and share this video, and if you don't already, can you please subscribe to the channel to keep up with new content. Check out my website, stevefielding.com, where you can find information on all my books, links to other videos in this series, and also order copies of the 3-volume hardback book, The Hangman's Record, at a special discount price. On sale now is my latest book, Tales from the Hangman's Record, available as a paperback and Kindle download from Amazon. Also look out for 2 new podcasts, Tales from the Hangman's Record and Mostly Murder, available on Spotify and all popular platforms. Finally, please use the comments below for your thoughts on this video and suggestions for further episodes in this series.